Hi there, I'm Souldapop. I normally do videos on mechanics and team building, but I promised this viewer another lore video, so here we are. Note, there will be spoilers for the 4.0 Archon quest, so if you don't want to be spoiled, pause the video, go do the quest, and come back. The video will still be here waiting for you, like Seymour in Futurama, but slightly less sad. Slightly. With that out of the way, let's get started. The 4.0 Archon quest was a mess. A messy mess, and I loved every minute of it. Right away, we're introduced to two of the major themes for Fontaine: justice and how the public responds to rhetoric. The latter of which excites me for two reasons. One, most of my videos are born out of dispelling misconceptions that arise from certain forms of rhetoric. And two, I'm a former English teacher. I started doing these videos because I missed the actual teaching part of my career. If you're asking what that has to do with anything, allow me to briefly explain what rhetoric is. Rhetoric is the manner in which you attempt to persuade someone or convey a certain idea. It's your word choice, your argumentative structure, your logical foundations, and the way you present evidence. It's the cornerstone of everything that makes up secondary and higher learning English. It is also a double-edged sword. Your chosen rhetoric can be used to persuade for better or worse. One very notable way rhetoric can be used to persuade in a negative manner is through logical fallacies. I don't want to overload your brains with too much information right away, so we'll put a pin in that for now. Anyway, at the offset of the quest, we are confronted by Furina. She claims we have violated the law by releasing a flying object. Putting aside how ridiculous that is, let's take a look at her claim. The act we are being accused of committing is releasing an object. In order for Furina to prove this claim, she would have to prove that we did in fact commit the act of releasing and that Paimon is an object. Neither of those things are true. We didn't release Paimon. She flies independently, and Paimon is not an object. Even if you want to claim Paimon is an object, because she was not something within our possession that we chose to let fly, Furina's claim that we have broken the law is a sham because both have to be true for that law to have been broken. But how does the crowd respond? They think Furina's claim makes a lot of sense until Lenny reveals that Paimon has been attached to us the entire time. So, are Fontainians stupid? No, I don't think so. I think they're us. Despite the opinions we may have about ourselves, it is our nature to be illogical. When we are presented with a dilemma, in this case, did the traveler break the law, our minds rush to fill the gap in knowledge with whatever it can. Sometimes it arrives at the right answer, but it is very easy to fill that gap with incorrect information when the speaker is the one that created the dilemma. You can think of it like jamming a missing puzzle piece into a space where it doesn't fit. The gap is filled, but you may not realize it was the wrong piece until the puzzle is nearly complete, at which point it may be difficult to replace that piece with the correct one. In this case, Furina first creates a gap in the public's knowledge and then immediately spoon feeds them an answer. That answer doesn't hold up to scrutiny, but as far as their minds are concerned, the dilemma is solved until they are forced to confront it again. That brings us to the crux of the Archon quest, the trial. Lenny is accused of murder, and in our pre-court banter with Furina, we're given an excellent use of dramatic irony that tells us everything we need to know about Fontaine. She says, the guilty can never prove their innocence. For those of you that don't remember your junior or senior English classes, let me quickly explain dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is when the audience is clued into information that the characters are not. The character's lack of knowledge results in an outcome that runs afoul with the expectations the audience hold because they have this knowledge. Modern media tends to flip this concept on its head by having the characters privy to knowledge the audience doesn't have, and using that to set up a cheap twist ending. But when dramatic irony is done right, it can be used to enhance suspense and tragedy by building to an outcome that feels inevitable to the audience. Now, if you haven't pieced 2 and 2 together, let's examine Furina, the god of justice's words. The guilty can never prove their innocence. Isn't it supposed to be innocent until proven guilty? That's what's referred to as the Presumption of Innocence. Whether your nation practices civil or common law, that's likely a foundational principle that we are all aware of. But here we have the supposed god of justice immediately spitting in the face of that foundational principle. When Furina tells us this, it tells us the deck is stacked against us. The reason the Presumption of Innocence exists is because it's almost impossible to completely prove one's innocence. Say you are accused of telling someone to commit a crime. That's practically unfalsifiable. How could anyone go about proving they never had that interaction unless their entire lives were recorded? That is why in both civil and common law, the burden of proof is on the prosecution, the accuser. The accuser must prove that the accused committed the act, because to correct Furina's statement, the accused can never prove their innocence. Practically speaking, guilty until proven innocent could be simplified to just guilty. The premise of the god of justice speaking in a manner that is so antithetical to the concept of justice, and seeing the traveler play into a game that our knowledge of the situation tells us they will almost certainly lose by attempting to prove Lyney's innocence, is just such a masterful execution of dramatic irony that I honestly did not expect from the writers. Bravo. But you're not here to listen to me gush about the writing. You're here for that juicy speculation, and oh boy, is it juicy. In Fontaine, all decisions of the court are made by the Oratrice Mécanique des Analyses Cardinales, a device of Furina's creation that, quote, harvests the people's belief in justice to operate. Throughout the quest, we're clued into the mystery of what exactly that means. How does the Oratrice use that energy to make its decision? I can think of 3 distinct possibilities. 1. The belief really is just an energy source, and it's just a computer that's powered by that source that makes decisions based on evidence produced in trials. 2. That's just a cover-up, and either Furina or another secret Hydro Archon is actually controlling it. I'll be honest with you, I know that's a popular idea right now, but I hate it. Don't worry, I'll explain why in a bit. Or 3, the Oratrice is using the people's beliefs to make its decisions. Let's start with our first assumption. The Oratrice is some unthinking machine that's weighing the facts as they are presented. As an unthinking machine, it assumes every bit of incoming information is true, and the scales swing in a certain direction depending on whether or not the information provided gives a preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not, that somewhat makes sense. I mean, that's what we see it do. But there's one bit of evidence that completely dismantles that. When Furina reveals that Lyney is Fatui, and Lyney acknowledges that claim is true, the scales move in favor of Furina. This is an example of an ad hominem fallacy, a form of flawed reasoning that attacks the character of an individual instead of establishing a relevant argument. Whether or not Lyney is a member of the Fatui has no relevance to whether or not he is guilty of the crime, unless there is also evidence linking the Fatui to the crime, which there was not. Some unthinking computer would not move in favor of an illogical argument. Not to mention, this is definitely not the first time the Traveler should have objected to Furina. But you can bet Mother Mary's virtue that any lawyer worth their salt would object on the grounds of relevance and lack of foundation, and would almost certainly call for a mistrial. That kind of evidence is prejudicial. The jury can't unhear it. In court, there's a system called discovery where all evidence is shared between both parties. The fact that Furina withheld this information from the defense alone and didn't establish whether or not it could be used during the deposition, which should have happened but didn't, and would almost certainly have established that she could not use that fact as evidence, would have caused this case to be thrown out of practically every court in the modern era. And I'm including Roman courts when I speak of the modern era. This is a huge no-no. But I hear you screaming through the screen, there is no jury, so it isn't prejudicial. To which I say, hogwash, of course there's a jury. Pay attention to the Oratrice. It only moves after the audience reacts. Do you remember what powers the Oratrice? The people's belief in justice. If you've read the title of the video, this is the moment you've been waiting for. This is a literal example of the court of public opinion. It is powered by the people's belief. Prejudicial evidence is fair game. You are guilty until proven innocent, and it works out this way regardless of whether it's handing out verdicts consciously or unconsciously. That is why we have civil and common law. We're illogical. The first explanation we hear is more often than not what we go with. First impressions are everything. There is no benefit of the doubt. In the court of public opinion, dissenting voices are simply endorsements of criminal acts, and no one wants to seem as though they are endorsing someone that is believed to be guilty. For justice to be served, we have to establish objective parameters that must be met. Just like our introduction to Fontaine and the debate over whether the traveler released a flying object. The statement is true or untrue, regardless of opinion or belief. That is the only way justice can exist. That is what makes this Archon quest so good. It's a brilliant way of hitting on the issue of public perception of guilt. It presents something so antithetical to justice that we can use it as a means to show what justice actually is. It uses rhetorical devices to let the audience pick out the flaws in the system and the reasonings without outright telling us the system and reasonings are flawed. It's so great, and I can't stop gushing over it. My god, I wish I could write like that. I know, you're not satisfied. But Lenny was ruled innocent. Childe was ruled guilty after his innocence was proven. If you think about it though, are those actually counters to my claim? Lenny was ruled innocent after it was proven that the crime he was accused of committing didn't take place. The girl wasn't abducted, and she admitted to being the one that placed Lenny's stagehand in the box without the intent to kill him. I know I was just gushing about the writing, but even I can admit that was such a cheap ex machina. But proving one's innocence is such a miracle that it practically requires some sort of ex machina to happen. What about Childe? Well, what evidence was presented against Childe? He's a harbinger. Scales swing. Prejudicial evidence again. Then a new trial starts, and the perpetrator is found guilty. Childe's trial resumes, goes straight to the ruling without any further evidence. Bingo bango, it returns guilty. All the crowd knows about Childe is that he's a harbinger. In their eyes, of course he's guilty. So, can you see why I hate the idea of Furina or some secret Archon being the ones controlling the Oratrice? It's so cheap, and it's unfalsifiable, just like Furina's claims against Lenny. Every time her claims are disproven, she just alters the version of events to fit her initial presumption. There's no way to completely disprove it. Even if it comes to light that I'm correct, that claim would still be just as relevant as it is now. That's just what they want you to believe. They'll eventually reveal I was right. You'll see. It's illogical. And it absolutely ruins a beautifully told story about the nigh impossibility of justice within the court of public opinion. And that's why I hate it. That said, just like last time, there is an unanswered question that I feel like we're overlooking. Another foundational principle in civil and common law is the accused right to face their accuser. So, who was Childe's accuser? When we see him on stand, there's no one on the other side. Surely in Fontaine, there at least has to be someone to levy an accusation. They can't just manifest out of thin air, right? So, who was it? I don't know. Maybe Arlecchino? Kind of wrote her off in my last speculation, so maybe it'll make y'all happy to hear me name drop her now. Do I have evidence for that? Oh, well, look at the time. It's time to completely ignore that question and remind you to subscribe. If you aren't sure about that choice, YouTube thinks you might like this video on screen. Feel free to give it a watch before you make your decision. Bye.